Cairns, please.
Margaret, Ceann Comhairle. Taoiseach, it's now more than 3 years since the then Taoiseach Micheál Martin gave a very clear commitment. In response to questions from my colleague Catherine Murphy, he said he was opposed to the state entering long-term leasing deals for social homes. To quote him directly, he said, "No local authority should be on the other side of this, engaging in long leases with institutional investors." He followed that up a few weeks later with another very clear statement. He said, "Long-term leasing is bad value. That is my view, and I continue to make it clear." The practice, we were told, would be phased out, except it wasn't. In the Sunday Business Post at the weekend, we learned that the state is continuing to enter into these deals, and the rents being charged are through the roof. Deals with rents up to €3,200 per month have been agreed. That means that over the course of a 25-year lease, the state is spending more than €900,000 on a single social home. And having spent nearly €1 million to rent it, the state then hands the home back to the developer or the vulture fund. So the state pays through the nose and is left with nothing except the bill. No asset, no home. In total, the state has agreed to almost 9,000 of these deals at a combined cost of nearly €3.2 billion. And all of these deals come with upward-only rent reviews, which are not subject to caps in rent pressure zones. You couldn't make it up. Quite literally, if you wanted to design a worse way to provide social housing, you couldn't. Every single aspect of the deal is bad for the state, and investment funds are loving it. These sweetheart deals are a cash cow for them. There's literally no downside. They lock in sky-high rents, include upward-only rent reviews, and ensure they retain ownership of the asset at the end. Taoiseach, you've spoken a lot recently about common sense. Can I ask you, do these long-term leases sound like common sense to you? Do they sound like value for money? Do you stand over them? Or, if we're honest, are they only necessary because of this and successive government failure? Failure to tackle the housing disaster? Failure to meet your social housing targets? Failure to deliver on government commitments? One of those commitments, let's remember, was a promise to phase out long-term leasing. Taoiseach, when will this government end long-term leasing of social homes, and when will you actually meet your own new build social housing targets?
Thank you. Deputy Taoiseach.
Thanks very much to Deputy Cairns for also raising this matter. So firstly, I think context is important. While I've already outlined the government's intention to end the use of long-term leasing by the end of 2025, I do want anybody watching in at home to be aware that this is a very small part of our overall housing provision, and an even smaller part, and also a very small part of our social housing provision. Just allow me a moment, Deputy. So 2023, last year, did see the highest annual output of social homes in decades. It is a statement of fact to say that we saw the highest level of new build social housing since 1975. Never in your lifetime nor my lifetime were more social homes provided than were provided last year. Over 4,000 affordable housing supports were also delivered last year through approved housing bodies, local authorities, the Land Development Agency, the First Home Scheme, the Cost Rental Tenant in Situ Scheme, and the Vacant Property Refurbishment Grant. This represents a massive increase of 128% on the previous year as well. We now have over 1,600 cost rental homes already being delivered, and funding is now in place to support the delivery of more than 4,000 affordable homes by 21 local authorities. And I say this for context, because yes, long-term leasing has been an element of housing provision, because in an emergency you use every tool at your disposal. And you ask, what does the state get in return? Well, it gets a roof over the head of some vulnerable citizens needing a house today. That's what it gets, because housing policy can't just be about ideology in an emergency. It has to be about using every single provision. No, well, it might be funny to laugh and joke over there.
Can we have the Taoiseach?
I'd appreciate that, because I doubt Deputy Kearns needs your assistance. But it might be funny. It might be funny to laugh and tease her over there in relation to this. But there's real people living in these homes. There's real people with roofs over their head, and there's additional housing solutions that this government has invested taxpayers' money in providing. Because when it comes to housing, we take a pragmatic view. Unlike some of you who rule this out and rule that out, we will use every tool at our disposal to maximise the availability of housing supply for our citizens. That is a good thing to do in an emergency. But let's be clear, the views of the Taoiseach, are the views of myself as Taoiseach, are the views of the three parties in this government. We do want to see an end to long-term leasing. We've been clear that the use of long-term leasing will end by the end of 2025. And I do need to say there's figures out there that I don't believe to be accurate, because a figure of 3.25 billion has been stated, but that's based on the cost of all leasing over 25 years, and it's based on 8,900 operational units. These figures assume that all operational leased units have a remaining term of 25 years. That is not the case. So we need to be very careful and accurate about the figures we put out there. It's not, Deputy. I don't really know what touching
Taoiseach, you reel off a whole load of figures to say you want to give context to the situation, but you leave out the very important figures that give context to the situation, which is record homelessness, record house prices, record people stuck in their childhood bedroom. And I think that context is pretty important as well. You might be new to the job, but Fine Gael certainly isn't. This government isn't. Your party's been in office for 13 years now. Clear commitments have been given, including a commitment to end long-term leasing. The practice of long-term leasing is actually just one of those broken promises. So you're now promising that it will be phased out, just like when Micheál Martin was the Taoiseach, he promised it would too, 3 Taoiseachs ago. And I think you might understand why to people out there it feels like the personalities change, but the broken promises remain the same, because there's a fundamental difference between the narrative that you're putting out and what the government is actually doing. So even yesterday I heard you on the Pat Kenny show saying that we need at least 50,000 homes per year, but the government set out a target as 33,000, and the Minister for Housing is saying that that won't change, at least until next year.
Thank you, Deputy.
So you're not in opposition, you're the leader of this government. If you want to change that, why don't you? Why is this promise to end long-term leasing any different to the last one? What's actually going to change?
Taoiseach, please.
See, I respect you, but please don't misrepresent my position at all, because I never said, ever said anywhere that there'd be 50,000 homes built this year. So let's not try to create a rift where one doesn't exist. What I said very clearly is this country needs to build 250,000 new homes between 2025 and 2030. It does, by the way. The Construction Federation industry, who are many of their members are involved in building the houses, believe that is eminently doable. I've already just told this House this afternoon that we've seen 29,000 houses go to construction this year so far. We've just started the month of May. There are reasons to be hopeful in relation to housing supply, and I absolutely stand by and double down that we will need to lift the scale of ambition in the second half of this decade, and there's a very clear process that all three parties in government agree with. We will publish a draft national planning framework in the month of June that will set out indicative headline numbers, that will go out to consultation, and finalised breakdown and composition of those numbers will be published in the autumn. There's no broken promise in relation to the phasing out of long-term leasing. It's the exact commitment the government has consistently been giving that it'll end by the end of 2025.